She said it was like $86,000. So, and then there's a balloon over to the right of that amortization. How much money is that left? She said that dollar. I said, add those numbers together. But she added the two numbers together, and it was a really, and I said, how much is that? And it's a large amount, much more than she's selling it. I said, how much are you selling the house for? She said, whatever. I said, subtract it. So you're making an extra $129,000 becoming the bank over 10 years.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's powerful. It's
Yeah.
really powerful.
Yeah.
And if you can hang on to it.
Parts of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only do you make more money in the end, but then you've got regular cash flow in the meantime.
Yeah.
That's pretty
And you
attractive.
have no tenants.
And you have no
tenants, no toilets, no turnovers, no any of that problem. I mean, that's the being the bank is so powerful. And if you sat there and you're able to raise money and do that with borrowed money at 6-7%, look what happens then. Your return is astronomical. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, more this creative financing world is really interesting, but there's ways to do it wrong. What are some of the most common pitfalls your tribe sees that you see from those who are getting started, or the most common questions you're seeing with those people?
Well, the questions are like, how do you do it? Like, and that's where everybody's learning, like, hey, I got a deal, the seller's open to sell financing, I don't know how to do it. And most people are just saying, hey, this is how you do it with the contract, and this is how you do the transaction. However, and even people giving advice out there are not even aware of, if you're putting a buyer into the property that's going to be a homestead, living it as a primary residence, there's a ton of consumer protection regulations on a federal and state level. And that's where a lot of people go wrong, and they don't even understand it, and they don't even realize it. We've been, for the last few months, we've been out there promoting it, and people are starting to kind of see, because I am starting to see people asking questions about it. So just make sure, like, if you're doing a seller financing, and if you're going to, your exit strategy is you're going to put an end buyer in that property and you're trying to wrap it, make sure if it's a homestead buyer that you totally, truly understand the regulations. Because I remember several years back, somebody was doing this and actually went to jail, but he was doing it predatory. He was doing it on purpose. So
real quick, let's get some definitions. Let's get some definitions. What's homestead mean for those people who may not know what homestead means?
You're living it, that's your home property. You're going to be living it as your home property, and you can get some, like in Florida, we get a tax discount advantage if you're a homestead. I don't know, is it the same way up in New Jersey?
We don't have that advantage. Jersey likes giving their tax money, so we don't.
Well, homestead, we have that. So in Florida, we're protected. If you're homestead, you get a lower tax break, and in Florida also, if you ever get sued or you accidentally they can't come after your property in Florida. Other states, they could possibly do that. But homestead is if you're selling a property, they're going to be living in the property as a primary residence. And that's where there's a lot of consumer protection regulations to protect that consumer. Because technically, if you're doing it as a full-time, you are considered a originator. You're originating loans, and that's bringing you, whenever you're talking about APR, finance amount, that's when you kind of opening yourself up to the whole regulations of financing. Now, you can sell it off to another investor that's not living it as a primary residence, and then you're exempt from those consumer protection rates, like the Dodd-Frank Act. That's just one of them. The SAFE Act. These are federal, but then you also have state level. What was happening besides the whole collapse? A lot of small and pop investors are doing the same thing when everything collapsed. They're putting people into the homes, not checking their income and seeing if they can qualify. And we actually seen a couple of cases where investors were being, pardon my language, scumbags, were taking people's large $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 down payment, knowing they couldn't qualify, and then turn around and foreclose on them and get them out of the property. He kept doing this over and over. And actually the attorney general stepped in, and the guy actually went to jail because he was just a predatory lender at that point.
So a couple of important points here. So the first thing you said back a minute or so ago is there's more to it than just the paperwork. So the paperwork, there's a way to do that. These are the documents you use. This is the process you do. That's part A. Part B is actual qualifying. And then we're talking about the SAFE Act and all those kind of things. And then it's state specific. So in Florida, you've got homestead. In Texas, you've got homestead. In New Jersey, you don't. So you have to know state specific. It's vitally important that you understand what the rules are federally and statewide, and which state has which rules and how do you abide by those. So the process is one thing, and that's the easy part. The paperwork, there's nothing to that.
And
But
a regular
understanding the
attorney,
rules
a
behind
general
it.
attorney is not going to be the person you need to speak to. You need to speak
No.
to a specialist that
Exactly.
understands creative financing, writing a mortgage and a note, or a land contract and a note, right? Mark, when you're doing a lot of these owner financing, are you creating land contracts? Obviously, in Texas, you don't do land contracts, but are you creating land contracts most of the time, or are you creating mortgages?
Well, I want to go back 1 second. So
Sure.
all the stuff that we're just talking about learning, don't let that scare you guys.
True, very
You
true.
know, because we threw a lot of stuff at you and I might like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
There's a lot of groups, and even these guys, you can reach out to people that are like note buyers and experts that will give you some advice and point you in the right direction. So don't let that
Yeah.
freak you out. So if you're doing one like that and you're like, oh my God, it's too, you know, I don't want to go to jail. Don't worry about it, because it's very, very profitable. Just get some
Yes.
proper guidance. And there's a lot of people here that would help you out. So,
100%.
And just
David,
to
back
add
to
to that
your
before you
question.
go on,
Mhm.
one more thing to add to that is, if you've already done some seller finance deals and they're not done correctly, almost always, like pretty much everything is fixable. So even if
Yes.
you're hearing this and you're going, oh shoot, I didn't do that, I didn't do this, I did it wrong, it's fixable. Almost
So-
everything is fixable. So don't sweat too much about
Yeah.
it, but just realize there is a right way to do it.
Right, and it's gonna be a cost
Yeah,
to it.
we
So when you do the owner financing and there's a person living in the home, Dodd-Frank, Safe Act come into play. You have to make sure that borrower has the ability to repay, not just a checkbook that writes you a $10,000 check and you walk away, right? The idea is to make sure they have the ability to repay, and it has to be, if you've done more than 3, originated by someone who has an RMLO license in that state specific most of the time. So Texas, we had Sarah on from Texas. There's people nationwide that we can recommend to you guys to get that set up so we can buy it. If we don't, we have to spend time, money, and energy to get that loan corrected. So, yeah, I mean, that's the first part of
and
it.
also, yeah, also if you're doing assignments and you think you're not responsible, be very, very careful. The North Carolina is actually looking at people, the wholesalers assigning seller financing deals. You're the one technically originating that note because you're the one that's structuring it. So they're looking at it closely, and they're also looking at assignment fees possibly being rolled into the APR, because all upfront fees are considered rolled in an APR, and then you have usury laws. So just kind of be careful of that. And again, I'm not trying to scare you, just
Yep.
want to inform yourself. That's all I'm saying. You know, that type of thing.
So usury laws,
So-
for those who don't know, usury law is what the max APR or interest rate you can give to a borrower, right? Business to consumer, that the state allows. Each state has different usury laws. Look your local state for knowledge about that. And that comes to play with us, right? And I'm gonna flip the switch for a second, because a few note buyers probably going, when are you gonna get to us and understand what we want? So for you guys who are creating these notes and you're doing it and learning correctly from people like Mark, what we recommend is make sure you write a note that's not only legal, right, that we can buy, that's foreclosable, mean legal, that I can go to foreclosure, a judge won't kick it back, and I won't have a problem. On the flip side, we want to make sure that you do that, but the paperwork and the note numbers, the 5 numbers that come into play, right, is your original balance, your interest rate, your monthly payment, which is your principal and interest, tax and insurance are excluded from that, right, your term and your balloon, right? Obviously, 5 years, you can't have a balloon, but then a term, right? Are you writing 360 months? Are you writing 240? Now, even if you're doing an 80-20 loan, the way we have a chart that shows you the best way to do it is the lowest term you could do, and the highest interest rate by law is the best way to get the best price from us. So if you're originating notes at 6%, I encourage you not to do that, because you're not going to be able to resell it. Right. And the borrower, you want to understand the borrower can't literally go get to a loan from a bank typically. So don't undermine the bank where they're giving out 7, you're giving out 6. Mark, what do you typically, your interest rate in your loans when you create them, what do they typically at?
See, for me, I take it a little bit step further, because when I'm structuring a deal, I'm also looking at what's the market rent is. So I need to make sure that the market rent is in line to what my monthly payment is. So I'm trying to get the max as much as possible, like 9%, 10, whatever it may be. However, if the payment is going to be out of whack, I'm not gonna be able to move that property. So you have to modify and play with your numbers a little bit, maybe lower the monthly, maybe lower the amount. So that's kind of how I look at it. So it's
Sure.
very, very tricky. If that makes sense. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
Would you ever write a note at
These judging
6%?
factors.
I hate to say it, but I have, because it was the only way the deal was gonna, but I knew I wasn't gonna sell that note. You know,
That's the key.
if I'm gonna sell it, yes. However, I had to do it at that rate because the monthly payments didn't match. So like, for example, like Jacksonville is a market where if you're doing seller financing, the house prices went up so much and the market rents didn't go up enough to cover that. And that's the problem. So it's a market by market.
Mhm.
So because the market rents didn't go up and the new prices of the new homes, you're almost, as an investor, there's not enough cash flow to be able to cover that, if that kind of makes sense. So because of that, I had to go a little bit lower. Actually, I had to go down to like 5.5 to make that deal work. You know,
Wow.
so that particular buyer, I mean, you can't get a rate at 5.5 nowadays.
Yeah,
You know, it's
yeah.
impossible.
That's a good
So
deal.
that's the only reason why I did that. It's just to
Yeah.
kind of make that the numbers were, but I'm still cash flowing because the underlying debt that I have on that one, because we did a wrap, was at 3.25 rate. So I had
Yeah.
enough cash flow spread there. And because I also shortened down the amortization schedule a little bit to kind of make sure my numbers work. So there's a lot of like playing around with numbers.
So
But if I'm selling a note, yeah, if I'm selling a note, there's no way I'm going to make sure what the premium is. And that's why, you know, we talked in the beginning of this, you know, when you're doing the 80/20, you can do that and make sure if you plan on selling that note in the secondary market,
Yep.
going into it, you kind of know where your rate needs to be able to sell that into the secondary market.
perfect. So we've kind of talked about it a little bit. There's education involved here. So make sure you learn the rules. And again, it's not rocket science. It's not, you know, we're pretty regular people, believe it or not. I know that we sound like we're pretty smart, but reality is, you know, we're not.
Yeah.
We've just learned through experience and through doing a whole bunch of these deals over time. And we're more than happy to share how to do that because there's room for everybody.
Gotcha.
So come and learn.
We did a question, LinkedIn's not feeding in through our system here, but Rakesh asked a question. Any thoughts about I-10 lending and investing in these notes? ITNIN, you know, what's your thoughts about this idea of having I-10 borrowers and lending on this kind of money that way? Any thoughts or curiosities or individual conversation for that?
Well, let me ask you guys that. Would you guys buy something like that?
Yeah.
The challenge again for me is at some point I'm going to want to resell this. Well, maybe. If I'm buying for myself and I'm going to hang on to it, I have zero problem with that. None. If it's a note that I know, like if I'm buying it for myself, no problem. If I'm buying it in my fund, that's a problem because I'm going to have to resell that at some point, and that's going to mess things up.
Yep.
Nice.
So let's talk about the
one
fact
thing
that wrap notes. You mentioned that. For those people who don't know what that is, what is a wrap note and where does it come from?
Okay. I'm actually doing one right now. So I'm actually I wish I had the numbers. Let's say trying to remember if I remember the numbers. So what you're doing is, let's just take some just round numbers. Let's say I'm selling it for $200,000 to my end buyer, $200,000 note. Okay. But they have an underlying lien with like say Bank of America, whoever, Chase or whatever it may be, and say it's like at $150,000. Okay. Then what I want to do is there's $50,000 of equity there. Me as the investor, that's where my profit is. So then what I'm doing is I'm taking the $100,000 note or $150,000 note with Bank of America, and then I'm creating my $50,000 difference, putting it in there, and then wrapping both notes all into one. So my end buyer's note is $200,000.